Welcome everybody to the Festival of Trusteeship. This session is Crisis Sorted, a Trustees Toolkit for Tough Times. And I think it says it all that we've already got 130 people in the room with us. I'm Penny, I'm the Festival Director. A few bits of housekeeping from me before I pass over to Claris D'cruz, who's chairing this session. So you will have seen that the session is being recorded. If you've booked this session singly, you'll receive the recording within the next couple of days. If you're a weekly pass holder, which I expect most of you are by now, you'll get the recordings all together at the end of the festival. You've been muted as you've come into the room automatically. Please stay on mute. That just keeps the sound nice and clear for everybody. If Claris does come to you for a question, if you speak, you will be on the recording. So please don't speak if you don't want to be on the recording. Closed captions are available. You need to enable those on your device. So if you want the subtitles, you need to click CC or closed captions. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves, to ask questions, to share resources, to share reflections. We'd really love to hear from you. The chats often get very busy at the Festival of Trusteeship, and the session that we just had this morning was no exception. If the chat is a distraction to you, please just ignore it. You'll find that it's on the recording file when you get it. So if you want to chat up later, you can. Catch up later, you can. And if Claris is taking a question from the chat, she will repeat it so that you don't need to be looking at it to understand the question. If you don't already have one, you can still purchase a weekly pass right up until the end of the week. That gives you access to 15 sessions and their recordings, whether or not you attend live. And a huge thank you to the Institute of Leadership, who are our headline sponsor this week. It's thanks to their support that the festival is so accessible. And a massive thank you to Stone King, and we've got Ros here from Stone King today. They are sponsoring the Good Governance strand, and this session is part of that strand. A quick note on geography. If there are any legal things, they will generally be for England and Wales. I don't know that we'll be getting into very, very in-depth legalities today, but just a note that if you're in Scotland or Northern Ireland or somewhere else further afield, please do check your local regulations. So thank you very much, and over to Claris.
Thanks, Penny. I'm chairing today. If you want to know a bit of background about me, I've dropped a link into the chat. Penny has curated a stellar panel here to talk about Crisis Sorted. In the 30 years that I've worked in the sector, I have never seen such a sustained and unrelenting period of challenge for charities and their trustees. So we're here today to talk to you about what it is you can do to navigate your charities, either to avert a crisis, or if you are faced with a crisis, to deal with it as well and as competently as you can. I'm going to ask our panelists, who are Susanette, Ros, Rob and Annabel, to introduce themselves when they respond to the first question. And I'm going to dive straight into the questions because I know what you want to hear is what our panel have got to say today. So, first question, Ros, if I could come to you first. What are the most common crises that charities or their trustees may encounter? And alongside that, do you think that these kind of situations are generally preventable, or do you think it's an unavoidable part of the life of a charity?
Thank you very much, Claris. And hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. As Claris said, my name is Rosamund McCarthy Etherington, bit of a mouthful, so Ros, completely fine. And I'm head of the charity sector at Stone King. I have also been a trustee of 4 charities, including the Small Charities Coalition, sadly no more, and Citizens UK, which is still going strong. And I've also sat on various advisory bodies. I've been a member of various committees. In my day job, I have spent the last 33 years, so fairly long in the tooth, advising charities, and increasingly advising charities that have some kind of crisis situation. And I've advised some well-known charities who have had a statutory inquiry, which is a formal kind of investigation from the Charity Commission, which can lead to sanctions. Just make the point that I do completely understand that charities come in all shapes and sizes, and I'm sure on this call we have everything from small grassroots organisations, and as I said, I was on a trustee of the Small Charities Coalition, to larger NGOs and perhaps even some international NGOs that work overseas. So very much bear that in mind, and some of the things I say perhaps won't be proportionate for a smaller charity. But in terms of the question, so what kind of, a crisis obviously can take many forms, and sometimes I like to sort of divide them perhaps into, something like a data breach or fraud or a cyber attack or a financial situation, and put them into one bucket. And life is messy actually, but just, and sometimes obviously things don't work in buckets, but in the second bucket, things that involve people and culture more. So that could be historic or current safeguarding concerns. There may have been whistleblowing in the charity commission, that could be to the charity or to the charity commission in its role to protect a body for the purposes of whistleblowing legislation. We could be talking about the culture within an organisation, or allegations that there is systemic racism, sexual harassment, some kind of toxic culture. And in terms of whether there are more crises, I suppose in some respects, this is a healthy thing. We have a less deferential society. People are, when I started out 33 years ago in my 20s, perhaps, we didn't have this emphasis on transparency and accountability, whistleblowing. I think probably there were more NDAs that charities entered into. Things got covered up, which is why, a current kind of crisis would be historic safeguarding cases coming to light, which have been sort of, were sort of put under the carpet, as it were, by, in times gone by. So in some senses that is good. There's greater transparency and accountability. On the other hand, I think there are obviously different pressures these days, particularly from social media, and the traditional media has a less, definitely charity's a fair game. Again, when I started out, it's very rare that a charity would be on the front page of a national newspaper with criticism or attacks. And then, we've got sometimes political motivations, whether that's attacking refugee and migrant charities, concerns about safety and security, the polarizing environment we're in with culture wars, etc. And some fundamental concerns, that things that we've taken for granted, like the whole human rights, rights to protest, freedom of expression, human rights. So there's a whole lot of things going on at the moment, and it's often quite a messy environment, and a really challenging one for trustees and for senior leaders and for volunteers. And I know that some people on the call perhaps won't have any employees. Some people will have lots of, possibly even thousands of employees and big teams. But I think the other aspect to the question, Claris, was whether a crisis is preventable. So obviously some, I don't think, did any of us predict COVID? Anyone else predict the pandemic? But I think, even if you can't predict every crisis, I think you can make the management of a crisis much easier. And first of all, by having in the right policies and procedures. Secondly, one thing I cannot emphasize enough, have a serious incident policy for dealing with reporting to the Charity Commission, although you might have to report to other regulators. And again, I suspect on this call, we'll primarily be talking about the Commission, but again, appreciate, depending on the nature of, if it's a data breach, you'll have to report that to the ICO. If it's to do with fundraising, the fundraising regulator. If you're health and social care, it might be the CQC, or if it's a safeguarding issue, it might be the LADO and the local authority. But in terms of the Charity Commission, having a serious incident policy in place and who you delegate to, because otherwise you need to convene all of the trustees, which can be difficult. Having a disaster recovery plan, risk register sounds a bit boring, but a risk register is really important. What are the risks that you think you're going to face? How likely are they? What is the mitigations that you have in place? And updating that and bringing it towards the board as much as possible. And then finally on this issue, I think insurance. So this is a pet subject of mine, trustees' indemnity insurance. So everyone sort of trots out, you need trustees' indemnity insurance. But what I would suggest is look at the policy and look at what's covered, because increasingly I'm finding that insurers you know, may not want to actually cover you. For example, they may say you didn't report this when it first happened. And then sometimes you look at the policy and you realise that actually, if it's going to cover the charity and cover the trustees, although the amount covering the trustees looks like a really healthy amount, there's a tiny amount to cover the charity. And actually, if a lot of dealing with your duties is dealing with the commission, but it hasn't become a specific allegation against you, then the insurer may well say you're not covered. So I think my final plea for all trustees will be to dust down your trustees' indemnity insurance policy and have a look at the terms and have a look at how much it's covering you for in terms of trying to make things easier if a crisis does hit. Anyway, that's just a little canter through some of the issues as I see them, Claris, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. I know you could probably do an entire hour on this, Ros, but you know, and it probably does justify an hour. But if I can bring in Annabel, so any crises that you have encountered or supported charities, Annabel, and can they be preventable or are some unavoidable?
Thanks, Claris. And I suppose let me just introduce myself then. So I'm Annabel Tonge. I've been a trustee for over a decade. I've been working, a bit like Rosamund, actually, I've been working for over 30 years and in various leadership roles. And I'm currently the associate partner at Q5, running the global foundation there. So I run all the charitable endeavours in the company where I work. So it's a really good question. I actually think crises are part of your business as usual, unfortunately. If you look at some of the things that we've all encountered in the last few years, COVID pandemic, Rosamund referenced that one. We all went through that and we all had to navigate that. And there were things that came with that, like furlough, for example, that perhaps we'd never heard the word before, but actually acting quite quickly on furlough made quite a big difference to cash flow management for charities. So I actually think it's part of business as usual. To Rosamund's point, though, the advice I was given once was never let a good crisis go to waste. So once you've actually got through the crisis, what did you learn and what would you do differently, or what would you have had in place had you known that was going to happen? And that's sort of reinforcing Rosamund's point there about what are the policies that you wish you'd had in place. Say you have an issue with WhatsApp, for example, and there's no WhatsApp policy, or it's not covered under social media, for example. They're the nuggets coming out the other end. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Always have a look and see how you can strengthen your business as usual following a crisis.
Thanks, Annabel. I'm going to stop you there because we're going to come back to how would you do it differently a bit later on if we've got time. That's brilliant. Thank you. Susanette, can I come to you?
Hi everyone, I'm Susanette. I love my title, Transformation Catalyst. I'm one of those people who can sit in a boardroom and go, why? I love the why question. I started being a trustee at a very young age and learned very quickly the dynamics, and also learning from those who have been ahead. So got a lot of mentor support for it. What I really, in terms of building on from what Rose and Annabel has talked about, is to me the main thing about crisis. I thrive in crisis. It's one of those things. I love a sailing ship for a while, for a bit, but then I get bored. I love crisis because there's so much that can be, that can be changed or evolved in terms of the organization of itself. I think fundamentally, from my experience, I was a chair in an organization where we co-chaired and went through a real structural change whereby we had to say to the CEO, this isn't working, and gave some options, and the full scream of it was that the CEO had to go, and we had to sort of deal with the internal and external element of it. What I think fundamentally I learned, and what I would say, is that as a leader, it is so important to provide clarity, even in uncertainties. Yes, we sometimes don't know these things are coming. No one knew COVID was coming. But it's about continually providing clarity in those times and saying, I don't fully understand it, but this is where we're at, and this is where we're hoping to get to. And with that, it's bringing your people along, both internal and external. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanette. That's brilliant. And Rob?
Yeah, thank you. And so much I recognise there from Susanette's experience too. So to introduce myself, first things first, I'm Rob Avann. I'm a charity consultant specialising in leadership, governance and strategy. I was previously a chief exec for a national charity for 8 years and a trustee for 16 years, five different charities. So great to be here today and chatting this through. Now, like Susanette, I was a trustee at a young age too, and my first crisis was a closure and wind up when I was a 25-year-old first-time trustee. And it was certainly, an experience to go through. It's remarkable. I came back to do it 4 other times, really. But certainly it was an experience. I think, look, you're never going to completely de-risk what we do in the charity and social impact sector. And I think it's really important to recognise that because of the work we do, it is always going to have those risks, those challenges, those potential crises or those potential challenges. And I think as a trustee, as much as a leader, you have to recognise that you're going to have those challenges along the way. You're going to have serious incidents to deal with. You're going to have, the longer you do it, the more those things you're out there, with. And sometimes half the battle is identifying when you're in them and what they are and what they're about, and therefore how you should manage the situation and deal with it. So do I think it's completely avoidable? Absolutely not. It's about how we manage and how we live through it, but also having the appetite that it is going to happen. And it's about how you plan, how you learn, how you adapt as you go forward, and ultimately how you problem solve and deal with it.
Thank you, Rob. There's so many things to pick out of there. A couple of things that I just comment on from what our panelists have said. Everybody mentioned the COVID crisis. Well, actually, I was governor at 2 schools at the time, and one of them we had disaster planned for if the school had to shut. Obviously, what we didn't, and that involved going to other schools, universities, etc. What we didn't envisage was everything shutting. But having done that little bit of disaster planning for that bit helped the rest and made us a little bit ahead of time or ahead of the curve. I've shared with you, hot off the press today, the new charity governance code. And I think if you have those foundations in place, then you are well placed. Also, just to mention what Annabel said about grabbing the opportunities in a crisis. Both schools, we were spending forever doing a digital strategy. I know that would have taken months, if not more than a year. We did it in 2 weeks. So sometimes there are certain things that crises throw you that mean you can get further ahead. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Second question, if I can come to you, Annabel, on this first. What do you wish you had known before handling your first crisis, or done before handling your first crisis?
I think that's a really, really good question. I've broken it down into 6 thoughts. I'll try and whiz through the 6 of these, and then I'm really interested to see what everyone else on the panel thinks here. But the first one, the most important one for me, is really make sure that you've got a good trusting relationship with your CEO, your board, and the other trustees. Try and establish that quickly when you become a trustee. It just means that when a crisis happens, you've got that trust base in place, and you can move quite quickly and you can talk quite freely because it's in a psychologically safe environment. And unfortunately, the clue's in the name with a crisis. It's never something nice that you're talking about. It's usually something that can be quite uncomfortable to talk about. So having a good trust-based start point is really key. And then within that, understanding what your role is. You might have a particular role as a trustee. For example, I was the chief advisor to the CEO for a charity for about 7 years. And that meant that I was sort of the first port of call in times of a crisis. And just understanding that was my role, as opposed to perhaps maybe a commercial role or a legal or a financial role. It just meant that I was ready to have those conversations. So just really understanding what you are, and also that you're not an executive. When you're a trustee, you're very much in that guidance and advisory role and bringing to bear all your experience, because you've so much experience and hopefully input to give. But it's to enable them to make that correct decision or to move in a particular direction. My third point really is that don't ever forget how lonely it can be for the CEO at the top when a crisis hits. Everyone's usually looking to them and their executive team. So being a good listener, being non-judgmental, just a good listener in the first instance is really important, and just being able to absorb what they're telling you. And to do that with pace and presence. So in terms of pace and presence, what I mean is that, again, crises are not planned. They're not the quarterly board meeting. Usually, they come in the evening or even on a Sunday night when you're making the tea and someone gives you a call and says, can I actually have a chat with you about that, something? So give yourself the space to have the conversations and to be present, and also give yourself the space once the crisis has happened to support the charity moving with pace. And never forget that obviously what they're telling you is confidential. I don't think that needs to probably be said too often, but it really is. And you might need to talk to someone about it yourself, but be sure that then is perhaps someone else, either the CEO again themselves or someone else who's a board member, someone else who's within that circle of confidence. And then finally, never never see it as a weakness to reach out to other board members. Often it's been a financial crisis I've looked at. Sometimes it's been a safeguarding one. Other times it's been a marketing or social media crisis that's happened. And there will be people on your board or within the network of the charity, either executive or non-executive, who have skills in those areas. Reach out to them if it's appropriate, to build that understanding and also to build that support back for the charity, so that what they're getting is really comprehensive advice. So that's hopefully I covered those 6 points in a comprehensive way.
Thank you, Annabel. Thank you. I loved your point about checking in and being there for each other, the board as a team, and also for the CEO and the executive, because that can make a very difficult situation much easier to handle. I would say, unfortunately, I think the confidentiality point does need to be rammed home, and that's from my lawyering days of seeing difficult challenges turning into crises because of breaches of confidentiality, unfortunately, or people talking about things when they shouldn't. Susanette, can I come to you next?
Yeah, thanks, Claris, and Annabel, thank you. There's so much, yes, there's so much that one can get in terms of the opportunities of crisis and what you can learn from it. And I think sometimes there is the issue. So I've come from both an executive and from being a trustees. And I feel like a lot of times in the charity sector, we love to say that we're social, we're trying to reduce social isolation, but sometimes we're the most socially isolated individuals in organizations, because there's something about the power of collaborating and learning from each other when there is a crisis happen, and how you can call other organizations in confidence and say, have you experienced this? I've loved being trustee, whereby I've worked with great chief execs, and there has been some that, oh boy, it has not been the case. So there's been lots of learnings, and also then I tap into other organizations. Have you been here? Have you done this? What did you learn from it? What can we take as next step? And be quick with that pace rather than having to do it all over again. So to me, it's and that being, checking in, having that mindset of walking the corridor slowly is super important, and with compassion, not necessarily going to go dig for dirt, because sometimes as trustee, you blur the barrier of who you are. But you're there to go dig for gold, and those ideas, how to be innovative as well as the compassion flowing, and both working hand in hand. So to me, that's the element of how do we learn from this, but sometimes not even internal. How do we find out from our colleagues around what they've learned, and how then do you pace yourself quicker, communicating well with the team and externally, to make sure that also then you're checking in our systems and structures, are they working rightly for a next situation? Because there's always going to be bound to be other crises that will happen. The one that I would say in terms of my very short story is, I sat in a boardroom as a treasurer, and I looked at a set of accounts that had been coming to us quarterly, and I had to put my hand up and say, I cannot verify and adopt this account, because I just feel that there's so much going on in here, and I need to go behind the scenes to see more. And those things are scary and they're uncomfortable, but that started and opened a whole kind of worms in things that needed sorting.
Thank you, Susanette. We will come back to that idea of navel gazing in one of the future questions. Rob, what do you wish you'd known or done before you'd had to handle your first crisis?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, this, and I reflect back on what I experienced and what I had at the time, and I think for me, one of the things, and I see this a lot with a lot of charities, and why this event is so important. I think that there isn't enough awareness and knowledge of what the trustee role really is, and your roles, your duties, what that actually means in practice, what it means when you get into certain scenarios and challenges along the way, what your role in those should be. And I think because of that lack of knowledge and that lack of clarity, I think that's where sometimes it can go astray quite quickly once you get into a difficult situation, that you haven't put enough work in advance in the sort of keeping your board development and your governance work going. You've not done proper inductions. You've not trained and developed your group. You've not wedded them as a group to understand the skills and experience that they all bring, and the lived experience and the journeys that they've all been on. And so when you hit something like this, it's when those problems come to pass and come to fruition. So for me, what I would have loved going into my first, experience, where it was, as I mentioned, a closure and wind up and other crises that I've dealt with along the way, it would be that, greater understanding. I think not really understanding your role well enough in the grand scheme of where it is, and certainly feeling that maybe other people around the table don't also, causes you so many problems. So I think that's where we should do much more work, particularly in the good times, right? Before these things come along, work on building those relationships, work on building that communication, work on understanding your governance and your role and your duties, and inducting people properly once you've spent all that time and effort to recruit them. So I think that as a sector, I don't think we do that well enough, and I think there is a lot more that we should be doing on that. That's why I think this is so important. And
there's so much available out there, isn't there, Rob?
There is.
So much of what you were just saying. I don't know if you've already read it. What is in the Trustee Governance Code, the updated one that's hot off the press this morning, around wedding people, around inductions, around understanding roles and responsibilities. I equate trusteeship to parenthood. It's probably one of the things you feel most passionately about, but you get into the role and then you learn on the job, and that is not how it should be, and that is not how it needs to be, because there is more. I think David talked about the Commission doing more to champion the need to upskill trustees. So thank you for that. Ros, coming to you, if I could ask you a couple of minutes on what you wish you'd known first.
Okay, so on the sort of lighter, optimistic side, the charities that I've been on, when you're working together through something, those people are still my friends. The kind of friendship and connection that comes through working together well on something, where there is that sense of trust, and where some things seem as if this is existential, but you work through it, and you feel somehow that you're stronger for coming through it. It sounds cliche, but that can happen. And so that it's a bit hairy at the time, but and particularly I think when the executive and the trustees are working together as well, that to me, to get through something, even though it can seem really tricky at the time. On sort of with my legal and lawyer's hat on, I think dealing with confidentiality and what is genuinely confidential is really important, because obviously we've got a lot of data protection laws, and you don't want everyone to be jumping onto WhatsApp, bearing in mind if unfortunately it ends in some kind of litigation, that all might be disclosable. Individuals can make data subject access requests, and I think, as Claris has said, the whole thing can become a whole lot worse, basically. And I think internal communications is really important. I think a lot of people think externally, but I think sometimes you have to manage some really tricky situations. So, for example, you have a whistleblower whose complaint is upheld, but because you then have to take maybe disciplinary action against an employee or a trustee code of conduct, you can't actually give chapter and verse to that individual, because you also have to protect the confidentiality of any individuals where there have been allegations, etc. And they also have, there might be another process that they have to go through. So how do you maintain trust in that situation? So I think internal comms and really trying to explain things to people is really important. I think also just from a trustee point of view, not interfering and micromanaging where that isn't required or necessary. It's difficult, isn't it? Because how do you get the balance right? Because sometimes it is all hands to the deck, and sometimes actually the trustees can provide invaluable advice. But I think it's knowing who's got what roles and and allocating those roles, and also making sure, I think, that you follow the policies that you've got. So the commission is really, when the commission looks at things, often it doesn't necessarily want to get into the substance or redetermine the issue, but it is very interested in, did you follow your policies and procedures? So for example, if your whistleblowing policy says X should be looking at this, then don't make it up on the hoof and decide that Y should look at it. Or if there has to be some variation of it, document it. So I think there's a lot of sort of granularity in all of this. Having said that, if you are a smaller organisation, you can't go wrong if you follow the rules of natural justice. So, for example, if there's something that there's an allegation against someone, then always think about the fairness of this. How fair is this? Has someone been given an opportunity to respond, etc.? And policies don't need to run to 40 or 50 pages. You can get good policies that are much simpler, but I think it's just making sure you have them in place. Thank you, Claris.
Thank you. Thanks, Ros. I can see some hands going up. Could I ask people to drop their questions in the chat? Because I'm also seeing things in the chat and we can perhaps pick them up in themes. We should have a bit of time. So could I ask, in the first instance, I will come back if possible to people if they put their hands up in the Q&A as well. Moving on then, Rob, can I ask you to lead on this one? Do you have any advice? We've heard about needing to support each other and support the CEO. So with that in mind, what advice do you have on how best to support staff, volunteers, fellow trustees? How do we support each other through a crisis while at the same time discharging your legal duties? So bear in mind, it has to be properly handled. That balance between supporting and handling well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Claris. So, I mean, the first thing I would say on this is to stay together. So as a board and as an executive, if it happens to be in a charity where you've also got paid staff, and I know many on the call might not be in that circumstance, but where you've got a team and where you've got a board, it's really important to stay together. I think one of the things where it can go sideways really quickly is when you drop into, apportioning blame or trying to think about where something's gone wrong, therefore someone's got to be responsible. There is, of course, a place for accountability and performance management, where that's relevant. But I think the first principle for me is to stay together as a board and work through the problem together and maintain that open communications. You are where you are. It's how you move forward from here. It's how you, go forward and progress the issue through, to solutions. And I think another really important element of that is communications, being open with each other, being self-aware about what gaps do we have around the table where we don't have great experience in this area, or none of us has been through something that's similar to this before. Therefore, we need to look at, external advice, people we know in our networks. We might need to pay for some support on certain areas, etc. Those things are really important. So that self-awareness and that communications, I think, is really, really important. And often I think, and then it's really about coming up with a plan to deal with the situation, right? Work the problem, be methodical, be calm, be patient in sort of working it through, and sort of try and think through scenarios of what might happen next, what might need to be what needs to be done here, who are the stakeholders who need to know about this, coming back to the open communication sort of point, to make sure that you're keeping people in the loop, that you're informing them and letting them know. And of course, as part of that, also think about, Ros mentioned earlier, serious incident report to the commission. If it's relevant to the organisation, you as a board should be taking that decision on, do we need to make a serious incident report? And do not see that as a failure. That is not a failure to report something to the commission. If the commission says to you, the board's got this under control, you are doing the right thing moving forward, and that is fine. You have notified, you've done the right thing, and you're showing you're exercising really good governance and good judgment in terms of moving those things forward. So stick together, have the open comms, and have a plan basically to get through the situation, and keep iterating that plan as things develop and as things move forward and change.
Thank you. As I pass over, I'll just pick up your point about the serious incident report having had to to report, you do feel hot under the collar, nothing better than that commission letter that says you've handled this, as long as you've told us everything, you've handled it well. Annabel, can I come to you about support for staff, volunteers and each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually going to build on what Rob's just said there about actually two things really. One about communication, because I come from a marketing and sales background, and we always had a rule of thumb, people need to hear things 3 times for it to really kind of sink in. So over communicating is, I would say, rather than under communicating. And that's part, Rob, of obviously keeping everyone together as well, isn't it? That things don't get splintered and you don't get these side chats happening. So definitely over communicating and working out, once you're in the crisis situation, what's that correct cadence of over communication. So it might be a check-in in the morning, you might be bookending a week, whatever is appropriate for that particular situation that you're in. That's the first thing. And then the second thing really is about being clear on the roles, because actually the roles that you have in normal trustee world will be one way, but actually in a crisis you might find that there's that those roles change. It might be that you need to dial up certain people on the board because they have certain skills. We've referenced legal expertise, for example. It could be financial expertise equally, or it could be something else, it could be commercial. So actually being very clear on, once you're in the crisis war room, if you like, what are the appropriate roles, and making sure that everyone's aware of those as well, because it might be that one of the trustees takes a particular lead on something, and that is the agreed role. And then really just to underpin those 2 points, just remember, because we all know the change curve, the good old change curve that everybody goes through when we go through change, but it usually starts with information. You hear something and you immediately go into denial. You might remember this from some training days that you've done. Usually people then go into anger. Then they start exploring, and eventually they accept. Now, that's a normal thing. That's a human thing that we all go through. Some people go through it really quickly. Some people, I know, Susanette, you talked about loving change. Some people go through that really quickly. They can absorb the information and quickly move through that. Other people, it can take time, and that's why that being clear on having very open communication and also being clear on roles is so important, because you'll find that some trustees and exec members will move quickly. Some people might just be in denial for longer, going, hang on a minute, I can't believe this is happening. Why is this happening to us? So, just remember that we're all human, and that's why clear roles and communication is so important.
Thank you for that, Annabel. Coming to you, Susanette, and picking up a question that's come in from the chat, where externally can you go to for support? And it's particularly in the context from the chat, if someone's trying to discredit your charity, or make something out of your situation.
Yeah, so an example that I could give is when we had the situation at one of the charities that I was trustee of, it almost seemed like externally there was a lot of conversation already happening, but because we never approached people and organizations to talk about it, everyone was just waiting to see what we were going to do. And so one of the things we did was to go to the council, because we had a relationship. They were part of one of our big stakeholders. And we're like, we got it wrong. And the room was just open to a real safe space to just talk. And they were like, we were waiting to see how we could bring this conversation to you, or not bring it to you, or see what you are doing. So I think there's that place of finding where your safe space is. You already have built those relationships. It's just being bold enough to go and have the conversation and say, you know what, we got it wrong, or this is what we're doing, and we're testing it. We might fail, but we'll learn from it, and we need your support to be there to help us in doing it. It's about being very visible in this time, whether that's online or in person, however that is, but it's being very visible and being in the place where you have those uncomfortable conversations to then get past that into what the solution could be. Claris.
Yep. Thanks. That's really helpful. Can I turn to you, Ros, and actually pick up something from the chat about the Commission's response, because I'm sure you will have dealt with this more times than anybody else in the room, about how you can present situations to the Charity Commission and how you can get them on side. What's said here is that their response was interesting, that when they hear directly in the first instance, it shows they're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And it's that point of getting your narrative to them before they hear it anywhere else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, Claris is right. I do file a lot of serious incident reports or advise on that for a wide range of charities. And interestingly, in the last few months, I chaired a breakfast Q&A with David Holsworth, CEO of the Charity Commission, who I think has spoken this morning, and did raise this question with him. And he said 96% of serious incident reports that are filed with the Commission, the response will be, yes, you're dealing with this appropriately. And you know, I do find that some groups of trustees are very resistant to filing one, because I think it feels like this scary thing to do, and that the sort of, you know, the wrath of God will come down on you immediately. But actually, it's a preventative thing to do, because, you know, the Charity Commission is just staffed by people who are humans, and they don't like surprises. So if somebody from a journalist phones them up and they don't know about it, they're going to react in a different way than if they think, yeah, under control, had a report from the charity. And if you can show them that you are doing exactly what they would do if they had to use one of their regulatory powers, if they had to order up disclosure of documents, or they had to give you a direction to enforce an action. But if they could say, look, actually, they're taking the right steps, they've got an action plan, they're following them, the chances are that they will essentially say, okay, you're dealing with it, and then you can update them. The other thing I would say is that, it sounds a bit weird to say this, but a crisis can be relative. And that's why I think your serious incident policy comes in handy. So, for example, you know, I work with an organisation that was dealing with an issue that was contentious and contested in public life. So they were always appearing in the newspaper. So if they filed a serious incident report every time they're in the newspaper, they'd literally be doing it every day. So in their serious incident policy, they essentially said, unless it's on the front page, and we also get broadcast news, so it's actually appearing on, you know, something like BBC or Sky News, we're not going to report to the Commission, and the Commission were aware of that. Whereas if you're a smaller charity and you get national news coverage, you might think it might be appropriate for you to file a serious incident report, because that's just completely something that you wouldn't be expecting. So to some extent, you know, and that's why I think having a policy is really good. And you know, there are some charities, particularly if you're working with, you know, hundreds or even thousands of, say, children and young people, then you might even be making almost like bulk reports, because bearing in mind that this is the sort of, although it's a serious incident report, you have to report unproven allegations if there could be risk of serious harm. So really, again, it should be called a serious allegation and incident report, not just because it doesn't have to be an actual incident. But like I say, I think the best thing to do is just to report. Particularly if you're in doubt about it, just report, and it will be fine, I promise you, she says.
Thank you. And I'm going to move us on to our last question, but I'm going to disclose I used to be a Charity Commission lawyer many moons ago, so it's just somebody like me that you would be writing to. In my experience, just both on that side of the fence and for the 25 years on the other side of the fence, where I was more poacher or advisor, they are reasonable if you're handling it as you know you should be as trustees. So coming to our final question, and Susanette, can I ask you to lead on this? What we've sort of touched on this point. It's about the navel gazing and Annabel's point about make the most when you've gone through that, make the most of learning from that situation. So what might you do differently to handle a crisis? What do you do after the event to reduce the chances of something similar happening again?
Yes, there's a lot in there. Thanks, Claris. I think a lot of times what we miss out on is the crisis finish. We thrive on urgency. So crisis is like an urgent thing, and then afterwards, what happens? it almost feels like, and that's where the opportunity of building credibility comes into play so much. Because if you can learn from it, as you know, some of my panelists have mentioned, then whatever happens next becomes you know, you've already got a curve in the sense of that to pivot you forward, to pace you higher in that sense. I would say reflective learning sessions is so important. Not just a debrief, because generally that's what happens, but a structured conversation that really explores what happened, you know, what can be learned from it and what needs to change from it. You know, and that does not just mean the board, but actually the staff team, trustees. We did that when our crisis, you know, was sort of moving on from crisis to sort of a almost sailing ship in a sense. And that session was absolutely great. And then bringing, so sometimes it doesn't necessarily need to bring stakeholders externally through the whole session, but you can bring them as part of the session and service users as well as appropriate in that sense. And then one of the things that I think we tend to miss sometimes is updating our governance structure with the learnings and the risk register. You know, what is it that we learned? Updating it. We had a situation at one point where a trustee competency-wise was not working, and we were grateful that the Constitution had a clause to be able to get to say, you know what, this ship and this bus is not for you. You're not sitting on the right bus, and we're going to need to move on. I mean, anyone who's read that book, Good to Great, it talks about it. And the point of it is afterwards, it's how do you embed those learnings into your policies, into your governance structures, not just filing it away, but actually bringing it alive and making sure that it is continually being addressed and looked upon. And is the implementation and application working well on a practical level? And then it's about making sure that as a team that you still bringing along the team by having those conversations. This is what happened. This is what we said we were going to do about it. Have we done something with it? And that builds that trust and culture with intentionality, you know, because there's a lot of residue that is left with the emotions of people. Sometimes it can be people they're really close with that is now having to leave. That leaves a lot of situations whereby you need to walk along those people. I love change, but I'm very well aware that with change, people walk in different pace, and you've got to walk with them as part of that empathetical way of leading people. And finally, the one I was saying earlier was about making sure that you can then share your learnings with the sector, because then other people can learn from it and avoid some of these crises that might emerge from your place. Other people can learn from it, just like how I believe in mentorship and coaching, because I believe that if I can learn from you what you had to circle 10 times, fantastic. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Susanette. Ros, can I come to you next about what we can do differently? And actually, maybe, I don't know if you could pick up on when you report the regulatory alerts that go out to the sector to share what's going on and what could be done about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just to sort of totally agree that essentially look at the, you know, what lessons can you learn? Good opportunity to update policies and procedures. What didn't work? Let's get it right for next time. And also perhaps reviewing governing documents, etc. I also kind of think as well, maybe have a period just to try and get to sort of normality, as it were, because I do have some concerns that trustees are volunteers, and funnily enough, I you know, sometimes I think, although I advise on crises a lot, I sometimes think, why, you know, do people have the time to be volunteer trustees if things are always acute or difficult? And so I guess it's trying to find that space as well where you've learnt the lessons and hopefully you can grow in a period of harmony and stability, because also it does take its toll, doesn't it? So I think another message would be well-being for trustees. We've talked a lot about how to support staff, but you need support as well. Peer support, peer learning. There's lots of bodies out there talking things through, and just understanding that you're doing an absolutely brilliant job, an amazing job, and everything you're doing to keep organisations alive and vital is really the backbone of what we need, and to feel that actually it's worthwhile. But you know, take time for yourselves as well, and to recharge your batteries.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really important point. Anyone who's had to deal with a major crisis as a trustee, I think it's only human to think, why am I in this situation doing this voluntarily? I've had a couple myself where you go to bed thinking about it, you wake up thinking about it, but as we've said before, when you get to the other end, especially with time, you realise the impact that you had being there, steering the ship in the choppy waters. Rob, can I come to you on that point?
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with a lot of what Susanette said in terms of the overall approach, in terms of being able to capture the learning is obviously really, really important afterwards. It's all too easy just to move on to the next thing, right? Because the charity and its work, and particularly if you're an organisation that doesn't benefit from having staff, with you, there is always too much work to be done, right? There's never enough capacity to deal with. And so your bandwidth of actually being able to do some of that learning sometimes is going to be under pressure from other things. But it is really important to capture that learning afterwards, not because necessarily lightning will strike twice, right? It might not be exactly the same crisis or challenge that you would go through, again, exactly the same, but there will be learnings from it in terms of how you approached it, what it taught you about the areas of skills perhaps you don't have around the board, or the external advice that you didn't have available, or how you could better benefit from it. Now, sometimes when you've lived through it yourself, I think also you may be not quite as able to be as aware about some of that learning, and that's where having some external support and facilitation to have those discussions, having somebody else take a look at what you did and how you approached it, and how you manage some of those conversations can be really important to do as well. And so absolutely capturing the learning, but I think it's also about looking beyond the organisation itself. Look at mentoring, look at peer networks that you can be part of, look at others out there who have experienced or gone through and what they have done and how they have got themselves through situations. Luckily, there are hordes of amazing webinars and resources all the time in our sector. And so sometimes just sticking your head up and looking out at what's going on elsewhere and what can be learned, I think is really important to sort of take that on. So I appreciate that challenge between ideally, absolutely, you should stop and capture the learning, but sometimes that can be really tricky to do when you've got umpteen other decisions and operational things to deal with and sort of progress moving forward. But there is real value in taking some time to really stop and pause and understand and really think about, well, what do we need to change and how are we going to embed it moving forward?
Thank you, Rob. And if you've got anything to add, Annabel, in just a couple of minutes, because I think we've got some questions coming in through the chat. As I hand over to you, for anybody who doesn't know, there's a fantastic thing if you're a board member of Association of Chairs called Chair in Crisis. So that might be something to look into, just picking up on what Rob said about sector support. Coming to you, Annabel.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I concur with what the other panelists have said. I would say, absolutely invest in that review session, that post-crisis review session, and separate it out from a therapy session, because you might need a bit of a therapy session where you go, oh my goodness, can I just grab a cup of coffee and talk to you about what we've just been through? That's different. We all need that. But actually invest in the review session and just keep it dead simple. What did we learn from this objectively? What did we learn from this? What do we wish we had in place if we'd known this was coming? And what can we therefore put in place to make sure we're ready the next time? Just keep it to those three simple questions. And also, when you look at what you've changed, so actually the pandemic is a good example of that. you can look at what's changed as a consequence of a crisis. You might also want to look at what you'd like to stop, start, or keep doing. And for example, online meetings weren't really a massive thing pre-pandemic. They're a massive thing post-pandemic, and that would have been one of the things that you would most notably probably like to have kept doing. So, you know, just keep dead simple, ask those 3 questions, and then look at the stop, start, and keep doing.
Thank you.
And then make it into a plan. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Penny. Penny, I think we've had a couple of questions. We probably only have time for one and for our panelists to do a quick fire. But could you choose one of the ones we've got and ask it? I've just seen Ros, thank you for sharing crisis management webinar series. Sounds amazing. So please tap into that. There's so much resources around this. Penny.
Yeah, I think we should take Peter's because it speaks to that, is it a crisis or not a crisis theme that some of you have been touching on. He says, I find it difficult at times as we've got a very small board, all run by volunteers. Due to the clients we get a few complaints, which are normally due to the high needs of our volunteers.
Thank you. And we've literally got 2 minutes. So 30 seconds each. Ros, you touched on this. Is it a crisis?
Yeah. I mean, like I say, some things are the kind of the normal things that might be expected to happen, and some things come out of the blue, and sometimes it's relative. But it sounds like in terms of that question, that maybe that's something that one could think about how to deal with it, because you know it's going to come up, and you know it's a likely occurrence. So best wishes for dealing with that. And I think some of the things that Susanette said were really helpful.
Yeah, so I'll come to you, Susanette. Just 30 seconds so that we can get Rob and Annabel too.
I think it is a recurring issue. I've seen that happen. The thing about it is try and invest in recruiting people, the right people on your board. Despite it being a small organization, you can be small and mighty by recruiting the right people to sit in the right seats on the board, or it could be advisory committees. It doesn't necessarily, not everyone needs to be a board member or trustee. You know, they could sit in other seats that will definitely make great impact. But then work towards let it not be such a reoccurring thing by having the right people.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go to Rob because we've literally got 30 seconds probably now.
Yeah, I would widen out the skills and capacity, definitely. And I would also think about the business as usual approach to it, in terms of that if this is going to come up because of the nature of what you do and what you're about, that therefore think about how you operationally manage that along the way. So perhaps less crisis and more, you know, regular plan along the way of how you deal with this.
Skills around the people issue, handling people issues. Annabel, you've probably got only 15 seconds now.
I'm nothing to add. I think the panelists have answered that brilliantly.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll hand back to you. I'm sure we could have gone on with this, Penny, but I'll hand back to you so that you can do the final bits for the session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you to all the panelists. You've given us so much rich insights there.
Thank you. It was a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you. I want to just highlight a few other sessions that we've got this week. So this is session 2 of 15. At 4:30 today, we've got governance hacks, easy wins for your board. Tomorrow, we've got Risk It for a Biscuit, our trustees 2 risk averse at 12:30. We've also got tomorrow how to close well, because I think that's come up. Rob, I know that was one of the examples that you gave. So that's how to close well tomorrow at 4:30. And on Friday, we've got strategy sessions. So 12:30 on Friday, strategy that sticks. And that's just some of our beautiful mix of sessions that we've got this week. And when you come out of this Zoom session, if your Zoom is up to date, you will get a quick fire evaluation question. Please let us know what you thought of this session. You will also be receiving an evaluation form. Weekly pass holders, you will get that at the end of the week so that we're not sending you 15 this week. But if you're keen to tell us earlier what you thought, you will find one on the Eastside People Festival of Trusteeship webpage. A huge thank you to Stone King again for sponsoring this session and the whole of the Good Governance strand. And thank you all so much, and hope to see you later this week for the rest of the festival sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, Claris, as well.